Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. I'm so excited to be here tonight to be having this discussion. I'm Annette Richmond. This is the Trend Talk Show, and our topic tonight is virtual learning. And I have three experts in the field with me, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves for anyone who does not know them. So, Bridget, why don't we start with you, and then we'll kind of work our way up and back to me.
Sure. I'm Bridget Weide Brooks, and I am a professional resume writer and the founder of bearesumewriter.com, which is a resource site for professional resume writers.
And my name's Adam Weisblatt. I am the founder of Blank Page Learning. I've been in the learning business for well over 20 years, and my company focuses on learning strategy for corporate learning organizations, especially focusing on the technology for platforms and for process optimization.
Excellent. My name is Monique St. and I work for an organization called Community Health Center in the state of Connecticut, but I have been in the L&D field for a few years now. I've been an instructional designer, a facilitator, adjunct professor, and now I'm working on the admin side of training, and it's been a fun ride, to say the least. Happy to be with you all.
Well, again, I am so excited, as I was saying before we went live. I'm always so happy when people that don't even know me that well agree to come on the show and talk about, something in their field. And so, let's just jump right in to the topic of virtual learning. And, I read some statistics that kind of floored me. And I'm just going to read this. It was from Statista, the research and market e-learning global market report. And it said that the e-learning market is expected to grow from 176 billion in 2017 to reach 398 billion by 2026, which is like almost $4 billion, which is I was amazed that it was so big. And part of that was because people have gone into AI. I'm sorry, not AI. People have gone virtual since the pandemic, and people are loving it and staying there because it is more convenient. And I've read some things that people are more productive, et cetera. So what do you think first of this growth? Is this in line with what you think?
Yeah, I've been hearing numbers like that. Go ahead, Bridget.
I was going to say the same thing. I saw a statistic just this last week that said it's 315 billion this year. So your figures track with the growth that I've seen as well.
Yeah, and they're talking about it going up to 400 and something. The it does kind of boggle my mind because a lot of corporate training groups, always complain about budget cuts and things like that, but they keep putting a lot of money into very big technology tools, and when you do that, then you've got to have people to run those tools. And this was happening before the pandemic. I've been working from home since 2013 and working with organizations that did a lot of virtual training, and there was always a resistance and a feeling like, well, this is not really that important. It's a nice to have. And suddenly, after the pandemic, it was no longer a nice to have. It was an absolute necessity. So the groups that were doing it already were ahead of the game, and now everyone's just has played catch up actually pretty well. Everyone just jumped in because the technology was ready.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would say I'm certainly not surprised at it. If for any other reason, it allows people to do training asynchronously, which is really helpful depending on how flexible your work schedules are, and people can do it when they want to, and also allows for personalized learning. So if you only have 3 people on your team that want to learn something, you could probably buy something out of the box for e-learning that is available to you, as opposed to having someone come in to speak to your folks. I think it's interesting because where I work now, almost all of our trainings are live. And so But that's a little bit different. On a virtual platform, we use Zoom often, but generally the presenter is there in live time versus doing something just as e-learning.
So for people who don't know what that is, can you expand a little bit on what asynchronous learning is?
Sure. When you're able to do it, not all together, I guess is the easiest way. It's a
Okay.
long word for no reason. Um, but you can do it on demand,
Uh-huh.
is really the way that I would describe it to folks.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that when I was doing my research, they were talking a lot about was the idea of collaboration, and and I will say that I was in a master's program. It was an online only master's program, and then we're going back like 20 years. And as far as the collaboration, we would meet on we'd have like a phone call once a week to work on our teams, but we did have a lot of sort of the message lines or message discussion things. Now I'm sure that things have changed since then, so can you share a little bit about what does collaboration mean today with e-learning?
Well, it's interesting because what you were describing happens in academia, right?
Hmm.
That it's been going on for years and it started venturing out of academia with these massive online courses that were made available to the public, where you could, spend 3 months and be on a class with people from around the world, and you would use those message boards, you would use,
Hmm.
shared documents and so on. But in corporate learning, they weren't really doing that much. In corporate learning, virtual just meant that you just showed up like we are right here,
Hmm.
and listened to a professor, or you did the asynchronous, like Monique was talking about, where on your own time you just ran a e-learning module. But now they're starting to talk about bringing those tools from the academic uh, virtual, and they call it cohort learning. So
Okay.
a cohort program is where you'd have a group of people who would take a course together and work on projects together. Now that you have the ability to share documents, on all these platforms, it's a
Hmm.
lot easier than it was in the past.
So instead of a semester, it's a cohort, and that's like the corporate name for semester or whatever. So I do want to ask, your all of your thoughts on this. But Bridget, I know that when you do online learning, because you do a lot of online courses, and you incorporate group meetings with that. So is that something? Where kind of where does that come from, and are other people doing that as well?
That it tracks exactly with what we were just talking about, where there's different types of even individual learning, where you can do self-paced, like Monique was talking about, or cohort-based, where you're doing it with a group. And it really is such an interesting thing to look at because people have different individual learning styles. And we were talking about, academia for years. I graduated from college 27 years ago, and you showed up in a classroom at a particular time and everybody was on the same path. And I think we've learned that people have different learning styles and they learn at different paces, and it's just so exciting to see this development finally catch up to that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't
Hmm.
think academia has changed all that much. I got my degree in 2021, and I did an online program, and I was actually surprised how close I felt to my university. I think they did a phenomenal job both for the students within the individual class, but also connecting us to what was going on campus. And to your point, Annette, it's definitely still a lot of making sure that you message by a certain time. They're very structured with when you were supposed to have it done by, comment on other people's responses by this time.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yes.
but so there's that version of it. But to Adam's point about cohort learning, for our organizations, we have postdoc residents that come in, and we also have doctoral students that come in, and we consider that a cohort. And when they all learn together, they all come in together. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is for HR professionals, when you start with orientation, you're all part of different departments and other things, and you all sit there in the same room and sort of have these conversations. And why not make that a cohort? If you all started the same day and started to do that, move them through together, let them learn together. What did you learn about your department? That's an easier way to go about it. You're all new, you're all fresh, get together maybe once a month or whatever to sort of understand and learn a little bit about the organization without trying to get people who are experts already to take time out of their day. Instead, try to learn it as a group, and then that way you guys are sort of starting at the same point.
And so it sounds like you all see a real benefit of having that sort of cohort experience, and it sounds like that. But I also am curious, how did the university make you feel close to them beyond, more so than just within the class?
I think because they stayed connected with us. I mean, they called us, which is interesting enough, actually
Okay,
on the phone.
okay, that is unusual.
Yeah, they invited you to other things that were happening on campus. You knew who your professors were, so they tried to get you engaged and involved in that way. And I think just in general, because we were all part of the same program, you started to
Mhm.
see the same faces. And so you started to go, well, did you take this professor yet? Or what order should I take this in? And so I think some of it was the cohort, but also it was just the school. I think I was able to go and visit live in person more than once to meet my professor. So I think that was partly me. I'm one of those people who insist on talking to people, even if you don't
Uh-huh.
want me to.
Yeah.
And I like to bring that into folks and then connect others as I can.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when I was in that program, the requirement with the first class, you had to spend a week on campus. And that
Mm.
way you got to meet everyone and you went through the studies. But Adam, it looked like you were about to say something.
I was just going to say that Udemy and Coursera, who are companies that kind of bring that academic model out to the public, have done lots of studies where they say that you are more likely to finish a course that you signed up for if you've signed up with somebody else. And I think
Okay.
so that connection with other people is really critical.
Yeah,
Well,
and I was gonna say, even to that, I've taken Udemy courses where the instructor always says, "Please feel free to reach out to me. Email me if you have a question." It all shows up there, and I'm one of those people who actually takes advantage of that. Just, I don't know you, but I took your course and I really liked it. Da 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 da. And so I think trying to always give people access to you, even if it's something where you're not live, is really
mhm.
important. And I met at a networking event. That's how I ended up here. It's one of those things of like, keep in your mind who might be helpful or what you might have seen and just say good job or whatever, just to
Yeah.
stay connected, I think.
I'm sure they really appreciate it. I have a good friend, somebody actually I went to high school with, and she teaches a lot of online. She said was an English master's in English and all that, and she teaches online courses. And she really enjoys the interaction with the students. So I'm sure they really really appreciate it. So I'd like to now turn to the whole idea of gamification. And when I first heard gamification, I was like, oh, okay, that sounds like something kind of like, really new and modern. And it turns out that it could be anything from, getting points or rewards or, things like that, some bonus points for doing something. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was the idea of having sort of people competing, for quizzes, like the timed quiz, and I guess who takes it faster and does the best gets, I don't know, a reward or a prize or something like that. And I was reading part of this buyer behavior report from G2, which is a software marketplace where people can read and provide software reviews. And they were saying, based on the reviews they see, that most of the online platforms have added some kind of a gaming, feature to the learning style, but that even despite this, that the users are asking, they want more. So tell me more. Tell me more about what really is it? Is it as simple as just giving some points, or is it can it be more engaging? Because I don't know. That doesn't sound as engaging to me. So.
I would say it's not engaging if you're not a competitive person, which I am not. And
Oh,
if
but I
you're
Same
a
here.
am.
sore, yeah, if you're a sore loser like I am, and I'm at the bottom of a leaderboard, then it's sort of pointless. I don't care anymore. So points and badges, I don't think are the things that motivate people, and some of the things that people both in L&D and outside of L&D, I think, focus on, but that's not, in my opinion, what gamification is.
Okay.
And I would also say, so someone like an industry expert would be called Cap. Rachel Arpin is known for doing escape rooms. I think it's more, it's building it into the story. It's
Okay.
about making it sort of an adventure, an experience, and that is part of the game. It's not just saying here are points to it. It's making you sort of the hero to the story and what's going on, and then help you kind of sort of problem solve as you go through. And it doesn't seem like learning. It's just a way to be involved in it and understand sort of the content. It's a different way to approach it, but I don't think it's just competition. That's not why people enjoy it, but happy to hear what others think.
But I would like to ask you to expand on that. And as you're saying that, it's making me think of, probably way off base, but it's making me think of the idea where they have, sort of murder mystery things, and you go with a group and you're in there and you all kind of solve the murder mystery together. And that's just what first came into my mind. Now, I'm guessing that's not relational to that, but can you expand on what that is?
No, I think it is relational to
Oh,
that.
okay, cool.
If you can create something like that, and it has to be relevant to the content that
Yes.
you're doing it for, but trying to think about it again, I've done not me, I've been part of things like scavenger hunts. It's silly, but it's a way to sort of get people involved, and now they're focusing on what's going on, how many do you have going on, and you're really engaging, I think, with the content more, as
Mhm.
opposed to just give me information, I'll take the quiz at the end, and I'm done.
It sounds like fun to me. Go ahead, Bridget.
Engagement is exactly the word that I thought of, and I'm glad you brought that up, Monique, because I'm thinking from a professional development side of things. I've been to a couple of professional conferences, some of them with you, Annette, where they've had, the idea of the scavenger hunt to get people more engaged with one another. But even some of the online professional development that I've done, they've done leaderboards, and you get points for completing certain activities. So I think it's a way to engage folks in that virtual learning more than a competition. It's more of, competing with yourself sometimes.
Okay.
That was a good point, to keep competing with yourself, because I think that's a lot of what it's about. I think the way they get the engagement is that suddenly, if there's some, levels you have to go through that that you feel there's something at stake, you pay attention a little more. And so it's really just to kind of get people more alert. And people, Monique, you mentioned Carl Cap, they always try to make a distinction that game is, competition where there's, a score and a winner and so on. Gamification is where you take the dynamics that work well in games and reapply them to other situations, in learning in this case.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's funny too, because when I was reading about leaderboards, and I was thinking of my Peloton. I have a Peloton, and when you're on the bike, you're on the leaderboard, and you can see, who's there now. And I'm always alone because I ride on demand, but you can see the all-time leaderboard. And you're right. Like for me, I mean, I am competitive, but for me, I look at it and I say, oh, okay, so I'm pretty good considering there are like 30 people in their 30s and 40s even that are below me on the all-time leaderboard, and it just kind of makes me feel good. So I don't know. But I think whenever you can get fun into anything, it makes it better.
But I think to Bridget's point about sort of challenging yourself, it's like having a streak. I know people do it for Duolingo, I think, and there are other things where you did this for 8 consecutive days. Don't miss it. Make sure you do it. Like that probably is going to make me more likely to do it. Or if you set the goal of doing it 2 times a week and you do it 3, wow, you're really on top of it. Can you do an extra one? That kind of stuff. Because you're really not competing. It's really more just encouraging you to do something you already enjoy doing.
Mhm.
Every time that I go to yoga, I remind myself, like, you do actually like exercise, like, once you get me to go.
Yep.
And that's sort of a reminder to yourself of like, okay, I've done this before, I do enjoy it, I want to keep doing more of it. And then, to Adam's point before, if you have someone else who's doing it with you, that certainly helps to sort of push you in the right direction. Even if they're not competing with you, just someone else to walk in the door to help you get over that initial inertia.
And Monique, you had mentioned before kind of, or maybe Bridget, you mentioned it about it being part of a story. I think that's where it really works best, when you make your involvement, the participants' involvement part of the story of this learning process, this learning experience. I think that's what really gets people plugged in.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, like Adam was talking about too, it's that personal motivation piece of it. And that's especially important when it is asynchronous learning, when you're going through self-paced material. Having some way of motivating yourself is critical to, sticking with it and staying with the goal. So for example, gamification, where they have to complete a quiz before they can move on to the next module. You're, again, competing with yourself. You want to get to that next module, you have to demonstrate mastery of it. But that's just a little piece. Anything we can do to help people, stick with learning is an important thing. So, there's different ways of doing that, obviously.
I think it's so funny because, for me, I was one of those people that I went to college, later, and I worked full time through all of my college years. And so I really, really wanted to be there. I have taught college courses where, the people just really did not care if they were there or not. They'd rather be someplace else. And I think of this video that I've seen often, on TikTok is, where they're talking to the teachers and they say, okay, they're hiring the teacher. They say, okay, so you're going to teach students math. And the person says, oh, okay, do they want to learn math? And they're like, no, they don't want to learn it. You have to make them want to learn it. And so I guess that, because I know we're talking really about adult learning, but I know they do some of this for in schools as well. And I remember those days when I was learning stuff that I was really not wanting to. But I want to switch over now and talk a little bit about mobile and micro learning. And as I read, mobile is kind of like it serves the content to users when they want it. And they mentioned like salespeople, and so I was thinking of a salesperson out in the field, and they want to go and they're able to search and get the information that they want. And they said that both of these have search functions and use mixed media formats. And then the micro learning was bite-sized nuggets that were sort of complete in themselves. And one of the reasons that the what I read attributed to this mobile learning being so popular is the fact that, according to Pew Research, 85% of Americans own a smartphone. So it's like, oh, okay. And I also read, according to Statistica, that education is the third most popular category in the App Store, which I found was really surprising to me, because there's like so many other things to do. Now, I can't imagine taking a course on my phone. So why don't you all explain to me why this is good and why people like it, and a better explanation of what it actually is.
The micro and the mobile are related to each other kind of by cause and effect. So they're two separate things. Mobile really means that you're not limited to where you are to be able to learn. You could be, learning can be anywhere. And micro means that you're not tied down to these big long courses. You can get something fast enough to access, in the middle of what you have to do. You're either traveling or working, but you really wouldn't be able to have mobile without micro, because nobody, like you said, would sit on a 3-hour course on a smartphone. So that's sort of the distinction between them. But the mobile can be a lot of different things. It could be text messages. It could be, like you said, apps, or even virtual reality, because I have somewhere a virtual reality goggle that actually snaps onto your phone. So it can be done in a lot of different ways. Whereas micro learning is really about the size and the accessibility. Like, how fast can I get to this information and then get back to what I was doing?
And I'm thinking professional development wise, because again, that's kind of the framework that I come from. And a lot of times, if I'm watching something for professional development, I'm watching it on an iPad, which of course isn't my phone, but it's also not my laptop. And again, it just gives me a little bit more portability. I'm not sitting at my desk usually when I'm doing that. I'm moving around or doing other things. And so I think it's that idea of the portable more than um, you know the content itself. It's just that you can access it anywhere and anytime you want.
I think part of the reason that has risen is partly for people who are deskless workers. There we go. I can get it out. And I work with people who are in healthcare, both in the past and now. They're not sitting at their desks for most of the day, and so some of that is just the ability to have it on their phone. Or if you are someone who works in a warehouse, again, you're not sitting in front of a computer all day to do it. So they needed to have or create a different way for people to access that information. So, like you said, on an iPad is fine, or while they're working on a forklift, something like that. And then for the micro learning version of it, I always think of it as how much time do you have? I love when things tell me if you have 15 minutes, you can do this much. If you have, 10 minutes, you can do this much. And I'm like, okay, I can kill 10 minutes. Like, that's fine. And then you find yourself continuing on even after that.
I think that a killer app for mobile is podcasts, because we've all been trying to figure. When this first started, a lot of people were like, "Okay, we'll just take e-learning or PowerPoint and just squeeze it in, squeeze it so that it fits on a smartphone." But that's not really very practical. Whereas a podcast is, I think people are more comfortable, like you were saying, Bridget, being able to walk around with your iPad and with your headset in. Another use for it is like Monique, you said about you've got a forklift driver and they've got to learn the latest safety protocol. You could have a device actually on the forklift, or you could have a QR code on the forklift and if you don't open up that course and do the safety protocol training, you can't start the engine. It's tied to the actual device.
Yeah. No, Annette, we can't hear you.
Annette.
I was hearing some feedback. I wanted to make sure it wasn't me. I can hear something where somebody's like moving around. I can hear some kind of feedback. But so explain to me, if I'm someone in healthcare and maybe I'm going from assisted living facility to different facilities or something like that. So how does the mobile, how does that benefit me? I mean, does it help me if I'm trying to figure out a certain dose for something? Or I mean, how does that work for me?
I mean, it certainly could be something that you could do for dosage. I know there are some apps that are available for you if you needed to do that, but I think really more of it is just that you can do it on the go in between appointments. So if you're traveling and you thought it was going to take you half an hour and it only took you 10 minutes, you have 20 minutes to kill to do that learning without having to go back into the office.
Okay, so it's like instead of me carrying a book with me or being on my phone checking LinkedIn, I can be learning on my phone.
You could be.
Okay. And
I was even thinking too with Adam, that idea, the QR code on the forklift, which hopefully they're not operating it while they're doing this, but that idea of having a QR code that is the operator's manual. Like, hey, you don't know how to do this particular thing, you can scan it on your phone and get access to the manual.
Yeah, I always think of QR codes as a search engine in the world, right? You're walking around the world and you come across, you need to get to a website to understand what you're doing, and maybe you're in a museum and you want to get some background information. The QR code gets you to the web page that you need to access what's happening in real life.
And so I would imagine then, say if I'm a regional manager or something, that I would want to have my team, if they're out in the field, have access to something like this, because that way they're getting the correct information and not necessarily maybe looking on Google for information, but getting the information we want them to have. Is that correct?
Yeah, the pharmaceutical companies really, have this down. They all get the, um, the iPads, because when they go in to see a doctor, they have a very short amount of time. And they have to give them a lot of information, and it's got to be accurate information about the medicine. So they've got it all on their iPad. But since they're there already and have the iPad to show the doctor, why not, before they get into, they're waiting in the waiting room, like waiting for the doctor to be free. Why don't they, like, you know, learn a little extra information about how to be a better salesperson before they go in?
Okay. Okay. It sounds interesting. It doesn't sound as fun as like, having, doing some kind of a story or game, but I do want to ask about something that I'm really curious about. I know nothing about this. And Monique, I mentioned, before we started, that you have experience in this area, and I'm sure will be other thoughts as well. But the whole idea of virtual and augmented reality technologies being used create sort of immersive experiences. And so, if you can tell me a little bit, it says students interact with digital objects and environments. And so, my thinking is thinking that, oh, I'm going to, somehow, if I'm studying history, I can be immersed in, the pilgrims or something like that to learn about that. But tell me, what is that? How does it work? It sounds like really cool to me, but obviously I don't know anything about it.
One of the cooler things that I've seen for augmented reality was about sort of flood awareness in a third world country. And so instead of having something like tornado drills, they had to think about, what if this room was filled with water? What would you do? And so using their phone augmented, they could see the room starting to fill and things starting to float, and then walking around and like, how would I get around it? How would I exit? Like, and it gives you sort of that stress of, oh, it's starting to get to the point of my shoulders, and I may not be able to swim, or I may not be able to go. Like, what is the next place to do it? So it was a way to really help people in disaster training, is a lot of what I hear that works best for.
Okay.
um, that's what I've sort of seen it for, which has been very helpful. Virtual reality, same thing, typically has been in the medical field where it's been most used, medical and or government. So government, like flight simulations and things like
Hmm.
that. And for medical, things like working on a body. You may only work with a cadaver once in your time, but in virtual reality, you can create that sort of muscle memory by doing it very similar to the way that you would do it in real life, particularly if you have something like haptic gloves that you can put in your hands, where you can actually move your hands as opposed to using
Hmm.
controllers where you're just using your thumbs. And those are, I think, the two that I've seen that have the most application anyway. Though there are different ways that different companies have used it, those are the ones that I think I could totally see that working for someone.
Okay. Other thoughts?
On Right before the pandemic, there had been a lot of studies taking place about onboarding, new hire onboarding training, that if that was not done well, the chance of the person leaving the job, within the first 3 years was much higher than if the onboarding was good, because that onboarding is, like you said, it's the time when you're really getting to connect with everybody in the company and feel like you belong. And if that doesn't go well, you don't feel like you belong, you're looking for the exits. Then comes the pandemic, and nobody can get together for onboarding, because
Hmm.
onboarding used to be this very expensive, arrangement. You get the hotel rooms, you fly people in from all over the country, and it was used to be very, in big companies, a very involved thing. Suddenly they couldn't do it anymore, and there was a fear, what if we lose that camaraderie?
Hmm.
And I have a friend who has developed these virtual worlds. They're these basically big, like almost like conference rooms, or conference centers, ballrooms, virtual, lobbies, where all the people in a cohort, for new hire training, will get together, and they'll actually be able to play basketball, like with their goggles on, with their VR goggles on,
Oh,
like running around and tossing baskets. And everyone says, "Oh, that seems a little, I don't know, it seems a little trite, or a little gimmicky to be, sending these goggles all around the world and paying this money for it. What do they cost? Like $300? Well, maybe 200 now. And you're having them play basketball, but it's so that people can actually talk to each other and have, start building these relationships. So it's another use for virtual reality. I've also seen where on augmented reality, which they believe is going to be as big or bigger for learning. And the difference between virtual and augmented, virtual is you're inside the world. Augmented means you're adding to the world. You're looking through your phone and you see it. You see your camera showing the world, but it's adding extra things. The most famous one is Pokemon Go. The kids see Pokemon all over the
yeah, I remember. Yeah, is that still a thing?
I don't know.
It is.
It is. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I remember doing that, and they do that actually. If you can do like a if you're on TikTok, they have features where you can put your camera and pull up somebody dancing or dancing Santa or something like that. So it's really kind of interesting. Bridget, it looked like you were going to say something.
Well, again, just tying into what you're talking about, Adam, especially when you're talking about that virtual lobby concept. Again, great application for onboarding, but I've also seen that with professional development, in particular conferences, where they had these lobbies where you would gather virtually and could interact with other folks. And again, we were talking before we started recording about, how nice it is to hang out with other people. For folks that are working from home, I could see that being something that grows. There was just something this last week about a woman who does it's not co-working, but there's a word for it where she is on her computer and people just show up and work alongside with her virtually. And I could see the application of that with, all of these technologies that we're talking about.
Wow. As you're talking about this, it makes me think, and I know this is a bit off topic, but the idea of, I know there's a lot of discussion, and I've had friends who have been, remote workers. And particularly if you are new to a company, as I had friends during the pandemic who, they never got to meet people, that if you had something like this, it can keep you in touch with people in your office so that you are not only that you see them, but that you are seen, because, when you're remote, people tend to think about you. So is that something that is being used? So stuff like that?
I think it certainly can be. The job that I had prior to this was completely virtual. None of the team was in the same state, really. So we all met online that way. And one of the things that we did was if we did sort of these lunch and learns, and that's only if you wanted to. They were optional, and you could
Mhm.
just talk about a skill that you cared about. So if I was an instructional designer and I wanted to teach you Beyond, and you had nothing to do with animation or anything like that, you could just come learn about it and just understand how those things were about and share sort of your expertise and how you might use it. We had someone who was our visual sort of developer, and he was really into things like Blender and changing the way music goes on. And I don't know all of the names of all of it, but it was really cool to see sort of the way that he came up with it. And that's a way to get to learn about people and learn what they're doing. And I think particularly if that person is a SME, it's very helpful to see what kind of goes on behind the scenes, to better understand how you can work with them. So again, my work prior to L&D was in marketing, and having to explain what I wanted to a graphic designer when I'm not doing the work and understanding their system for doing it and how they do it helps a lot, because I know to them it's not just an inch or it's not just a box, it's unlinking 16 boxes that are connected to each other and having that sort of connection with them. But then Adam's point of sort of getting into virtual reality and doing basketball or whatever, we did stuff like that as well, where we would just play games and everybody had a turn, choose a game that you want to play. And sometimes it was things that was just you could use with your web browser, other things that you were in your headset. And I think it's just a way to really just to hang out with people in a environment that isn't evaluative. There we go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I love that. I just do want to say hello to some friends that we have in the audience. Claire is here, Claire Davis. Hello, Claire. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And my buddy Dan Roth is here. Thank you so much too for popping by. He says hello to Claire. I love when people are networking in the comments. And my buddy Sarah is joining us from Colorado Springs. So it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. So I do want to, I must say hello to Felipe. Okay, we can't move on. So before we say hello to Felipe. So thanks for joining us. So one of the things that I think is interesting, and I was talking to recruiters about this in January during a show like this. We were talking about AI feedback, and I know just a little bit about that. I know that LinkedIn has their job section, and you can go I can go in there and I can answer interview questions. I can record myself answering the questions, and I can get AI feedback. And so, I tried that so I could share it with the people I work with. And, afterwards it said, my pace was good, and my, mix of tone was good. But I was flagged for using filler words because I say a lot. And so they picked it. But I thought that was, really helpful. And I just will mention for anyone who is listening that that is something that any LinkedIn member can use, but you do need to have a premium account in order to get that AI feedback. But I thought that was very helpful, and I would think something like that would be, if you have a job interview and you just need to practice a little bit to have that. But so how does that work in learning, and kind of what do they do with that that's really good, and what is done with that that's not so good?
There's so many aspects.
I know.
Okay.
Thinking through.
We have a little time, so
Yeah.
Pick one.
So
there's
there's a lot of different aspects. There's basically, if you think of AI as, the ability to kind of what I call hyper guessing, they've got it, the AI programs are using such large databases of human interaction. Everything that's ever been said on the internet is in some database. And the AIs can have so much data that they can predict what people say. If you want to see that work, open up your phone and start typing and watch as the words come up, because it knows what your next word is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So when you apply that to learning, there's a lot of different places for it, right? If you look at skills, being able to attach people to the skills they need, being able to attach skills to the learning that provides it, for creating learning content. If you want to make customized learning content, the biggest drawback is just having enough hands and having enough people to create that content. Now you have ChatGPT that can create the content. I know that might freak a lot of people out, but it's not going to do the whole job for you. It's really just helping you generate the quantity. There's a lot of other ways it works. It could be used for adaptive learning. It's just there's so many different applications, but it's all in the early days. Everyone keeps AI has been around since since the 50s and 60s, but it's moved so slow, and then all of a sudden has these rapid jumps, and everyone goes, "Oh my God, it's happening!" And then it moves really slow for a while.
Yeah. So Bridget, you're nodding your head. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, like I said, there's so many things to consider. One that I was thinking about from the virtual learning side of things is automated assessments, putting people through a process, and then the AI determines, where they're strong and where they're weak, and potentially identifies, then what the next step could be to bringing that, skill, up-leveling that skill. So I think that there's so many possibilities. Like Adam said, it moves fast, but it moves slow. I think that we'll continue to see that evolve, but taking the human piece out of that assessment to eliminate bias and that sort of thing, I think is a real opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to answer your question, but I'm going to give you a resource anyway.
Okay.
In that, if you want to practice public speaking, Toastmasters is the way to go. I'm a big Toastmaster nerd, and I've been part of my local club for many years. So if you want things like tone and speed and the way that you're using gestures and filler words, etc., that is a way that you can practice that is relatively cost effective, depending on naturally your budget. But you can go to a club, go for free for once or twice, just to sort of understand and get an understanding of it. And it's a great way to do impromptu speaking as well. That, or I would say encourage people to do improv, because that's another good way to start speaking in a way that you're not necessarily comfortable with, but you're
Mhm.
also getting feedback on. So that was my two
Oh,
cents on that.
oh, absolutely. I have a couple of friends who are real Toastmasters devotees
Hmm.
who have gone on and on. I've done Toastmasters myself, so I know it really can be very, very helpful. And I want to mention my buddy Felipe says that ChatGPT is just a tool that needs a human to review, but it can help people in so many ways. And um, I agree with that in the sense that I use it a lot for brainstorming. And if I'm wanting to host a show on a topic, I may put, give me 10 trends in whatever. And then I look through there and I always will find one or two things that I just didn't think of at the time. And then of course I do my research and I want to learn more about it. I'm not going to just go by what I get from that. But I do find that helpful. So I do want to ask you something, and I'm not sure how this could be used in learning, or if it can at all. And I mentioned something to you before we went live that my friend Paula was telling me about this AI interviewing, and she told me, and I'm not going to be as on target with this as she was, but the general idea is that they have people in the company do assessments, answer interview questions, a few things like that. They record them, and they choose a variety of people. Maybe some people that are superstars, some people that are kind of just doing a good job, and some people that maybe are not doing as well. And if I come in for a job interview, they are going to take what I do, and sort of the AI measure me against other people that are already there to see where I might fall in the category, as an employee. If I, appear that I would be a superstar, maybe, or maybe, just not a good fit. Is anything like that done with learning? Is there any way, not to be judging people, but can that be incorporated in learning in some way, do you think?
I've heard about it being done with sales.
Okay.
You go on a online, you record a sales pitch, and
Okay.
then that's compared to other people. The part of that makes me a little nervous is not the AI in itself, but the size of the sample data.
Okay.
Because if it's not big enough, then a lot of um, you can't really say AIs have bias, but there's a bias in the data
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
there's not enough variation in the data to accommodate for all the different ways people speak and so on.
Yeah.
So that would be my only concern, but I definitely have heard it done
Yeah.
in the sales arena.
That's what she was saying, good, because this is something she just introduced to me. I had never heard of, but she's done study in that area, and she said that there is pros and cons, a lot of thoughts on both sides of that moving forward. So we are getting close to the end of our time now, and I always like to ask, because I brought up a bunch of things. We've talked about a lot of different topics, and I've learned some stuff tonight, but I'd like you to each share something maybe that we haven't talked about that you think is important for people to know, and then where people can find you, if it's on LinkedIn, or if you connect with them on LinkedIn, or whatever you would like to share. So let's go in reverse. Why don't we start with you, Monique, and then Adam, and then Bridget, and then come back to me to close it out.
Oh, there's so many things we've talked about, though.
I know, but there's always something more that you can add.
I'm sure. I'm like grasping at straws to think about what I would include in sort of what we had there. The one thing we didn't mention is naturally the metaverse, but it's not an area that's explored enough. I don't really know if it's going to take off. I would suspect it would not. But that's an area, what I would say really to folks in general is if there's something that you're interested in, try to learn as much about it as you can. There's no hurt in just trying to figure it out. Talk to experts who are doing it. Try to figure it out yourself. You're not getting graded for it, and you never know, it might help you in the future. So those are my last parting words.
Okay.
For me, I've been in this a long time, and I call myself a geek wannabe. I know enough technology to get excited about all these, very edgy kind of, flashy things. But then when it really comes down to it, the thing I'm most interested in is the people who do this work. And I work with a lot of training groups, a lot of learning organizations, especially in their operations, because those are the people who are pulling all the levers on these big learning platforms. And they struggle so much because there's such a demand for more and more and more content, and yet their processes are not, efficient enough to keep up. And so they're scrambling around making all these sort of like little back end spreadsheets, and just grabbing whatever tool they can to try to work. And they want to help people, they want people to learn, and they're just having a rough time. And there's this new class of tools that are coming out called either no code or low code tools. They're sort of spreadsheets on steroids. They let you do what a programmer would have had to do in the past, but you can do without having to know any programming, to make your systems a little more efficient. So when the learning management system can do this much, and the learning experience platform can do that much, and there's a gap in between, these tools can fill that gap. And I think that's, even though it's not as sexy as putting on a virtual reality thing and playing basketball, it's something that can really help people in their day-to-day job, and that kind of stuff excites me.
Okay. Sounds cool.
And Annette, this has just been such a fascinating discussion and so many different pieces of it. The takeaway for me, I think, is that, even the more things change, the more they stay the same. People are still hiring people. There's still a need to be a lifelong learner, no matter what that looks like, whether it's, the formal classroom, going back to school remotely or in person, continuing education, all of those different components of being a lifelong learner have really added to that growth, that $400 billion that we're going to get to. It's coming from somewhere. And I think, having graduated 27 years ago and all the skills that I learned back then becoming completely obsolete, during those intervening times, I think it's more important than ever that people look for opportunities to continue to learn, whether that's, through the virtual reality or the, in-person conference or whatever it is. So I think that, like I said, is the biggest takeaway for me, is just, it's exciting to see what's going to happen and a little bit scary, but the principle behind it is the same. You can't stay where you are and get where you want to go.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, and I am completely sold. If I was independently wealthy, I'd be in school somewhere. I'd probably be over in London studying Shakespeare or something. So I hear you, and it is there's always something. What if you don't learn? If you don't grow, you don't grow. So I love that. I think it's a great point to end our discussion on. And again, I thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights. I am so appreciative. And for everyone who has joined us live, or will be watching on the replay or listening on my podcast, thanks so much for joining us as well. So have a great rest of your day or rest of your evening if you're over on the East Coast like me. So good night now.